5 nights after the third incursion warning, Tony Stark stares at a lattice of collapsing probabilities and decides the multiverse won't breathe for them. A distress pattern repeats under cosmic noise, the same 3-note flare hidden in gamma storms, whispered through astral thermoclines, woven into neutrino static like a prayer. He gathers the Avengers because the pattern says, "Help," in every language they've broken and rebuilt. He combines his multiversal frame with Strange's sigil geometry and T'Challa's vibranium dampers, anchors it to a charter clause, to defend all citizens, known and unknown, and calls the engine the Oath Gate. The room heats, metal sings, the floor tensions like a drum, and a hard white seam cuts their world open. They arrive over a shrine world that names itself Heliodora, and dawn does not come the way it should. The breach yawns above Hive Orison Primus, like a wound that refuses to scab. Pilgrims on the 1,000 steps clutch pilgrim staves and relic straps as wind turns their breath to needles. Vox masts spike, auspex in command spires strobe blindness, and the city's macro chimes jam on one held note. The sky peels. A white seam flowers into a vortex whose edges are scripture and static. Thor lands first because thunder is a language that belongs to him. He hits air that fights back and feels it fight harder. The warp presses 12 hands against his chest and asks whose god he belongs to. He answers with Mjolnir and a vow. The hammer writes a line of true lightning between the tear and Heliodora's clouds. And for a moment, the tear remembers what it means to be an opening instead of a devouring mouth. Hulk falls like a verdict and makes a crater on a manufactorum roof, one knee down, fists out. Metal screams. Sparks bloom. He catches a sloughing reliquary spire in both hands before it crushes a crowd of workers who don't have words for green gods. He lifts. He bellows. He sets the Saints down on a loading tract like they are fragile things. And for the first time in a very long time, the workers of Orison Primus believe something large can choose to be careful. Captain America's shield sings a different song. He ricochets off a collapsing transit buttress and anchors a human chain with grim efficiency, hand over hand, scared child by scared child. His comms stay open. Lines on my left. Move, move, eyes on me. His voice is command room cool and market stall soft by turns. In the storm of panic, it becomes a column to grip. Black Widow and Hawkeye move where the shouting is useless. Widow hacks a jammed gate loom with fingers that know every language made of zeros and knives. Hawkeye plants grapnels across the maw of a structural crack and turns rope into bridges. One arrow, one crossing, one life at a time. They don't speak much. They don't need to. Their breath fogs the air, and their eyes never leave the faces crossing the line. T'Challa takes the ledge nobody sees. He places shiver plates of vibranium along a buckling ward wall and hums the counter-resonance a temple cannot hum for itself. The wall stops singing its death song. The crack in the floor eases closed like a jaw unclenching. He nods once to a line of sisters who watch him with eyes that weigh and do not soften, and he accepts that judgment without flinch. Stephen Strange floats in the highest pressure zone and paints circles that aren't circles. He binds the edges of the tear to the Oathgate's promise with chalk marks that burn in colors this universe names heresy. He pays a price for every line. He hears whispers and does not catalog them, because to catalog is to notice, and to notice is to invite. He looks down only when the wind stutters and the sound changes. And when it changes, he anchors harder. They save a city in pieces. Not cleanly, not all at once, but visibly. 1,000,000 who should be falling are not falling. Trams shudder to a stop instead of tumbling into chasms. Hive corridors hold because invisible weight is shared. The tier stops widening. On the ridge of a command spire, a woman in a storm blue flak coat lowers her binoculars and swallows a prayer she is not allowed to say aloud. By the throne, the planetary governor breathes. Her adjutant, Vox beads buzzing fire, names casualty projections that begin to shrink under her eyes. We owe them. She says it like a diagnosis, not like a dream. She says it like something she will have to argue for. Beside her stands someone in black, whose rosette is a small sun eating itself, an inquisitorial seal. The Inquisitor watches the breach with the particular stillness of someone who has learned to move thought around a minefield. We owe them an autopsy of their intent, he says, without looking at the governor, and a bolt shell, if that intent proves cosmically naive. Stark's voice opens on a shared channel he shouldn't have had. Hi. Local command. Tony Stark, Avengers. We are here because your Sky screamed a distress signal encoded in a place no Sky should know. We're stabilizing the seam, but it's tied to an oath engine. It only runs on promises we keep. So if you could avoid shooting us while we do our job, the math gets better for everyone. Math, the Inquisitor says, the word like a test. Theology with better units, Stark says. We can get doctrinal later. We will, the Inquisitor says. We will, the governor echoes, which means we will live long enough to argue. From the tier comes the counter-argument. Warp-pale shapes sluice through the seam with the eagerness of flies to heat. Spined craft with symbols like wounds, brass, teeth, scripture written in meat. The air knows their names and tries not to speak them. The first wave falls on Heliodora like hunger with banners. Heretic strike craft dive on Orison Primus and rake habitation hives with fire that howls. A macro bell shatters. The 1,000 steps ripple. The city dips toward panic again. Engage, Cap says. And the word is a hinge the moment uses to turn. Thor arcs up with the storm tucked into his shoulders and punches a demon engine so hard its soul unthreads. Hulk rips a landing claw off a heretic assault barge and drives the barge into the next one, then uses both as clubs until there are no more nearby. Widow dances across gunnels, double taps eyes that don't believe in brains, and drops to catch a falling novice with a roll that turns lethal momentum into gentleness. Hawkeye plants an arrow in a rune-etched spire the size of a truck, and the spire chooses to be a capacitor instead of a gun. Left flank now, he calls. And 3 squads of conscripts who have never been called soldiers yet become soldiers before they can say they are afraid. T'Challa's kinetic fields take butcher fire meant for civilians and send it elsewhere. He doesn't send it back where it came from. He sends it into dead ground and vitrifies sand that will never hold a footprint again. Strange does precise violence. He binds grinning warp missiles inside mirror cages that show them themselves until they forget to explode. He draws a glyph no this world scholar has dared to preserve, and a demonic standard forgets which way the wind is. The hole in the sky narrows to a surgical aperture. His hands shake. Stark stops speaking long enough to fight like a man who knows how engines argue. His repulsors talk to the air in hard grammar. The Oathgate's tether lines hum on frequencies he did not steal, but begged from allies who decided saving strangers was a solvable problem. A heretic cruiser sees something on its auspex it does not have words for, and decides to die before it learns the vocabulary. A war sister voices over local vox. Her words are wet with smoke. "Emperor be praised," she says despite herself, and then louder, "Hold your lines. These angels are not ours. They are only help. Use them." The first wave cracks. The governor does what governors do when survival is probable, but not guaranteed. She convenes war. Her command chamber is vox heat and map light. She stands before a holotable that floats a bleeding model of her city. She says, "We have unknown saviors inside our airspace, and I want to live through knowing them." The Inquisitor sits on silence like a throne he is not sitting on. He watches the hologram shrug under new impacts. He says, "We praise what saves. We test what stays. I will have their oaths bound in words our law can punish." The governor nods as if that is a pact. "I will have their hands where our people can see them," she says, and sends runners to open corridors and doors. "Bring them here." Within minutes, the Avengers are inside a room with walls like votive candles made of iron. They look like they've done a day's work because they have. Hulk is breathing like a train. Thor's hair is full of static and sacrilege. Widow's knuckles bleed where the silk of her gloves hid nothing. Strange's hands don't stop trembling. T'Challa doesn't unfold his helmet, because sometimes a face makes people imagine they know who you are. Stark does the talking because someone has to. We're the Avengers. We landed because you were falling. Our engine runs on an oath. If we break it, the breach widens and the corruption gets teeth. The governor takes that in like a bullet she will live with. Governor Livia Soares Valerian, you saved tens of thousands in the last 12 minutes. I am grateful. I am also not a priest. Gratitude makes no law. The Inquisitor steps forward with a rosette that makes the room colder. Inquisitor Ram Kastan, you are Xenos, in effect, if not in origin. You are warp-touched by transit. If you threaten this world, I will have you turn to mist. If you aid it, I will catalog your methods and your words until they can be constrained. Cap meets his eyes and chooses stillness that isn't submission. We're here to help. Hold us to our word. Hold us hard. It is the point. Good, the Inquisitor says, without turning it into praise. The War Council proceeds without the music of trust. It doesn't need music. It needs percussion. Macro cannon tracks show a fleet signature decelerating into the system's inner orbits. The Auspex overlay tags malign symmetries. The Vox priests whisper about liturgical patterns inside the noise. The Inquisitor tightens like a sword in a scabbard. Word bearers, he says. They bring sermons with teeth. The governor staffs batteries and mobilizes the shrine militia. We will be overrun, she says in the tone of an engineer estimating load, unless the angels break their wings for us. Stark dips his head as if accepting a price. We can repel an initial push. The gate can power a repulsor net, and Strange can stitch the seams. But the gate's limiter ties output to promises kept. We made one. Protect civilians. Your batteries will break that if they arc through hab blocks to hit landing craft. We can't push the power you need without that rule. Your engine runs on morality, the Inquisitor says, flat. It runs on constraint, Stark says. Constraint keeps monsters from becoming efficient. Efficiency is often confused with sin, the Inquisitor says. Sin is often confused with a plan. Widow murmurs, and doesn't apologize when the room hears. Cap shoulders the argument. We can hold the ground and the sky if your gunners change their arcs to low collateral corridors. It's harder. It saves lives. It satisfies the engine. The governor looks at her artillery commander. The woman's face is ash and iron. She says, we can try, like we can climb a wall with knives in our teeth. Try with doctrine, the Inquisitor says. We will not allow heresy to breathe in order to spare breath that praises it. His gaze sharpens. And know this, if your oath machine fails, we will destroy it, even if it strands you between realities. T'Challa meets that calmly. Then help us fulfill the terms. They do. The first push hits Orison Primus like rain of knives, and they catch knives with shields made of hope and calculation. Repulsor nets intercept assault boats at very specific angles. Hab spires hum with redirected force that goes nowhere people live. Sisters of Battle anchor choke points with bolter hymns that the Hulk shelters with his body, because their fire works better when it is not interrupted by falling masonry. Thor makes corridors of lightning for landing talons to miss and landing claws to find. Hawkeye's arrows map a path through air that pilots think belongs to them. Where his arrows do not go, craft die. Widow turns Vox ghosts into clean commands and trains frightened PDF sergeants to speak like they have always led. Strange closes warp cysts over the city with lines that cut his palms. Blood drips on chalk. Chalk takes blood and remembers. The Oathgate hums approval that is not a soul, but sounds like one. Stark runs telemetry faster than the word-bearers can make mouths to blaspheme in, and writes a firewall for a god. They win the first hour. Then the second wave arrives with a different logic. Ships like black catechisms translate into low anchor. Not chaos, not imperial. The auspex returned say absence where they should say metal. The Inquisitor says the word like a diagnosis he hates to speak. Pariahs. His teeth click softly like a prayer whose ending he forgot on purpose. A Colexis cadre and a null engine fleet. Someone in the officio learned a lesson too well. The smart enemy enters not as a banner, but as a subtraction. A shadow passes over Strange's wards, and the glyphs forget themselves. The oath gate's hum attenuates to a thread. Thor's lightning gutters. Hulk pauses with a statue's confusion, then snarls, because rage is a fire that hates being asked to be cold. I feel nothing, Strange says, sweating. And that's the weapon. Null ships drop null pods that bloom null zones over the city. In those circles, miracles die, and promises find no purchase. The word-bearers chant louder, because a magic dead zone makes faith louder to those who only learned one song. Into that deliberate silence strides named antagonist A. He walks like a pulpit. He wears scripture like armor. His Crozius is a black sun. His shoulder bears a book whose words bleed, and in his right hand is a blade that hums as if it belongs to the idea of cutting itself. Dark Apostle Malchior of the Sable Concord mounts the highest sanctum he can find and speaks through vox, throat, and warp. People of Heliodora, he chants, and the chant carries. You kneel to a corpse. Hear a voice that answers. He points the Crozius at the Avengers and smiles like someone about to make a point. Behold angels not of your liege, shining with ethics from a universe where gods are editors. They will teach you kindness, while we teach you consequence. His blade lifts and eats light. Strange steps forward because sermons cannot be allowed to finish. The null zone opens its mouth and swallows his first word. His sigils misfire like wet matches. Malchior's blade goes through a ward that should have killed it and taps Strange's ribs. It is a tap with the strength of a titan stepping on a glass. Bones do what bones do. He collapses to one knee and tastes iron. Stephen. Stark's voice is not cool. It is a flare. Malchior's laugh is almost kind. Mercy, he says. A language for children until they are old enough to read reality. Cap moves. He is not faster than light. He is faster than regret. Shield meets Crozius, and the Crozius tries to teach the shield about meaning. The shield has its own degree. Sparks scatter. Some of them, concepts. Cap slides. Plants. Drives. Thor drives in too, but the null air steals the thunder from his wrist. Mjolnir lands like a hammer without a storm behind it. The demon blade hums again and cuts a groove in Uru. Thor feels it. He has never felt that before. He remembers a father who is gone, and a throne that is not his, and a promise to protect a tree whose roots are now in a hell with a name this world says differently. Hulk charges because null or not, mass is honest. Malchior does not try to stop him with strength. He sprays words. Dark runes detonate around Hulk's eyes, each detonation a vision in miniature. A city he failed to hold. A friend he scared. A hand he broke. The green shakes into gray for a second. It is enough to stagger. Malchior takes that second and cuts a line through Hulk's thigh. The green roars. Blood answers. T'Challa intervenes with fields arranged for absence. His suit drinks failure. The demon blade skitters a fraction when it should not skitter at all. He pays for that fraction with a hollow in his chest where courage lives. The null hates courage too. Widow goes for tendons because sermons stand on them. And Hawkeye threads a shot so narrow it writes itself between two syllables. The arrow hits Malchior's vox spool. The sermon breaks. Silence becomes tactical. Strange, Stark says under his breath. If you can't burn, can you bind? Can you make a mirror without light? Strange's laugh is a cough. I can make a promise, he says. And that's what the gate listens for. He draws in his own blood. He writes a circle not of light, but of must. He anchors it to the oath gate with a clause he hates. I will carry this cut if it carries them. The circle climbs around Malchior's ankles like a ring set to a finger. Malchior looks down with genuine interest, then tries to step out of it, and finds that promises are sometimes stronger than physics. Cap hits the Crozius again. Thor hammers the demon blade with empty thunder until the groove in his hammer stops deepening. Hulk uproots a shrine's banner mast and uses it as a lever. Malchior tries to sermon his way out of leverage and fails. Widow puts 3 shots into his secondary hearts. T'Challa closes the field like a fist. Hawkeye smiles once without showing teeth. Malchior breaks the ring by paying something they do not understand yet. He leaves fingers in the promise. He laughs without sound and falls back under a canopy of null that hides him. The second wave snaps shut like a book. Strange breaths and gasps. The Oathgate hums like a heart 2 beats from failure. Stark checks numbers and looks worse than anyone has seen him look in a while. We can't do this again like this, he says. Null eats our advantages and feeds their sermon. The Inquisitor appears with a cadre of stormtroopers who do not trip over the sight of a green god bleeding on holy tiles. He speaks to Strange, like to a colleague in a field everyone pretends is different. You were struck by a metaphysical weapon that knows where meaning lives. That is how it pierced you. Strange nods and doesn't say yes, because words cost. He says, they have a mimetic toxin too. Hulk saw his worst self in an instant. I felt the blade tell my bones they were a hypothesis. If we keep this dance, we lose the rhythm. The governor says what commanders say when options narrow. We need a counter none of us have. She looks at the Inquisitor like it is both insult and hope. What do you know that hurts the null that won't kill us as well? The Inquisitor's mouth tightens, then opens as if to concede that even Inquisitors need to share secrets sometimes. Sacred silence is a weapon, choirs of blanks. Saints who never were, singing negations to songs they do not understand. We keep them in cellars where light is an indulgence. He looks at the Avengers and weighs their worth. You will not like them. They will not like you. But they can wrap your promises in a cloak the null glare skids from. Cap hears it like a call. We don't have to like it. We have to live with it. Living with it is how men die, the Inquisitor says. But sometimes, dying later is the best purchase. They go down into a cellar that is a nave without windows. The air is clean and cruel. The people there are pale, beautiful in a way that hates being described. And their eyes look past faces, because faces are noise. They are the blanks. Pariahs. They are kind enough to exist, and terrible enough to cancel. A tech adept in robes that whisper sutras of calculus affixes nodes to Stark's engine and to Strange's hands. The nodes hum like 2 negative signs kissing. This will render you unpalatable to certain predators, she says, and her voice is grateful to the math. It will also cut you off from some of the fire you launder as righteousness. Strange's fingers go numb. Thor feels Mjolnir's weight increase without mass changing. Widow's instincts dull like a blade through bone. Hulk feels clean in a way that makes him angry. Cap feels the shield heavier, and better somehow, as if gravity has been rephrased in a language he speaks. T'Challa stands beside a pariah who doesn't look at him. He describes the edges of the field around them with his hands the way a farmer talks to soil. The pariah says nothing and moves 1 inch closer, which is their way of saying, I heard you. The sacred intervention is not a shortcut. It is an announcement. Bells that never ring once, below hearing. Sisters lock armor and march in files with faces like the points of spears. The governor makes a call for pilgrims to stay in sanctuaries and not die for her if they can help it. The Inquisitor tightens a gauntlet with ritual exactness and says, to the sanctum above, we will repel once more. Then, because of precedent and law, you will journey to Terra. The question of you is larger than a world. They accept that because they are sane. They fight again with the choir humming around their edges. Null falls on null and produces friction. Strange does math with dry hands. Thor beats silence with a hammer that remembers its thunder without needing it. Hulk rips a null anchor off a drop pod and uses it to paint a circle in the street that tells anything crossed into it to be less than itself. Word-bearers chant and find their words sliding off armor that has learned a little of the universe they thought they owned. Malchior appears once in an aperture and laughs a question shaped like an offer, but his voice won't cross the new air. They hold. The second wave breaks its teeth. The third wave decides to wait for a book bigger than itself to turn a page. After, the city breathes like a wound that isn't mortal. Smokestacks lean less. The macro chime tries a note and finds it. Pilgrims tend to strangers in corridors, usually reserved for prayer. The governor goes where the blood is thickest and writes orders that sound like kindness. The inquisitor heals in the only way he knows how. He plans the next sin they will forbid themselves. We depart orbit by nightfall, he says. You will stand before the throne not because I wish to curry favor, but because I do not wish to usher an apocalypse by omission. I will bind your wrists in words until they look like lace. You will submit to that, or we will try to kill you. Cap nods once. We submit. Good, the Inquisitor says, not tender. The voyage to Terra with an elite escort is a liturgy of metal and vacuum. They embark aboard a battle barge named Indomitable Grace, whose corridors are scripture and scars. Custodians do not stand there. Not yet. But men who have looked at a custodian from a distance once stand like they practice a thinner version of that posture. Sisters of silence keep pace with their steps. The air around them tastes like unseasoned bread. Strange spends hours in a Medici chapel where machines pray to him in beeps, and nulls make the wound in his ribs feel like accurate pain. A sanguinary priest analog with gold in his hands sketches a seal of recovery on the skin without touching it. It will hurt in ways our doctrine recognizes, he says. You will live in the margins we allow you. Stark visits the engine rooms because that is where he is most at home. The tech priests sing to machine spirits with voices that think sound is a sacrament. He listens with respect and makes small suggestions with greater respect. If you alter your cont to a 7-beat here, you'll reduce cavitation in the tertiary plasma flux. The Magos says, we have no word for cavitation that is not a sin. Stark grins without contempt. Then call it a lesser pride and fix the flux. They do, because results are also doctrine when you can count them. Thor finds a ship chapel with an image of a golden man whose eyes are closed. He kneels because he knows kings, and because kneeling is not always submission. Sometimes it is memory. A chaplain with a jaw like a cliff asks him if his god has a face. Thor says, he had many. He was flawed. He is gone. The chaplain nods. Then you understand us. Black Widow spars with a Sister of Battle in a practice cage where the rules are badly written and clear. They trade bones and laughter that doesn't reach their mouths. After, Widow helps an acolyte adjust a power pack with hands that have broken things more expensive than faith, and the acolyte says nothing, but she stands straighter when Widow leaves. Hawkeye finds a viewport where the warp looks like spilled oil catching fire and stares at it like he can arrow it shut. He can't. He still strings a bow and practices gestures to remind his fingers what they are for. Somewhere behind him, a crewman says, it's prettiest when you don't know why it kills you. Hawkeye nods. That's true of a lot. T'Challa debates a chaplain analog whose skull helm is in his hands while the man is a person. They discuss cost and dogma. Cost is what makes the dogma honest, the chaplain says. Dogma is what makes the cost bearable. T'Challa responds, dogma dulls edges, cost sharpens. Sometimes we need both knives. They do not convince each other. They understand each other enough to share tea. Mid-transit, the ship shudders in a way that is not physics, but intention. Geller fields flicker. Vox warnings collide and breed. The Inquisitor's eyes cut to the ceiling as if looking at a god he hates, and he swears in a language that predates the crusade that made him what he is. Interception, he says. From inside the path, brace. They are boarded by something that carries their own faces in the warp like parodies. The intruders wear armor that looks as if an artisan drew the Avengers with a ruler, and no forgiveness. Iron Man stalks forward as the Iron Autocrat, welded to a suit with no seam, his face a gold mirror with no arc of a smile. Thor is there as the Thunder Absolved, whose hammer is a judge's gavel that falls only one way. A Widow analog moves like a shadow that learned to be a chain. A Hawkeye with a clockwork eye does math that calls itself mercy. A Hulk stands tranquil and empty, a mind removed to make him optimal. And Strange appears as the Surgeon Supreme, who cut out his doubt and called the cauterization enlightenment. They speak with one voice through different mouths. We are the mirror host, they say. We optimized. We silenced the part that resists clarity. We offer you our cure. A short, high-concept clash follows. It is surgical. Stark fights the Autocrat and sees a version of himself that never left the workshop to talk to people who bleed. The Autocrat's repulsors are perfect. Stark's are good enough. Stark stutters the Autocrat's power by feeding it a problem the Autocrat will never accept. Be less. The Autocrat cannot. His systems crash for 3 heartbeats. Stark uses them. Thor meets the Absolved and finds that a judge who never doubts cannot be moved. He moves around one. He ties a hammer throw to a grace he learned from a woman who turned a blade aside with a smile once. He lands a blow that tells the Absolved there is another answer. The Absolved breaks there, a seam he never admitted he had, and Stagger loses. Widow fights the chain and bleeds and smiles because the chain never does. She makes a mess of the mirror's ankles and refuses a killing blow the chain had already planned to take. The mirror blinks in a way a mirror never should. That blink is the loss. Hawkeye takes one shot and misses on purpose because the mirror's math cannot calculate dignity. He hits the clockwork eye's reflection in a shining spool, and the mirror loses his line. Hulk faces the Perfected and plays a trick as old as monsters. He smiles. The Perfected does not understand that. The confusion opens enough space for Hulk to grip his arms and insist on a self that includes anger and not. The Perfected cracks because there is nothing inside to take the blow. Strange fights the Surgeon by saying, "I am not improved," and it hurts like ripping a suture. He wins because losing is part of what makes him who he is, and the Surgeon cannot read that. The Surgeon retreats into a concept and doesn't like what it feels like to not finish the operation. A divine sign, if one wants to call it that. Forces withdrawal. The warp in the corridor thins to a transparency that shows stars in a way none of them will ever see again. Everyone pauses to look. The mirror host steps back, their edges unlacing. "Reach the throne," the Surgeon says, without scorn, "or we will reach you again." They reach the solar system with an escort whose presence is its own judgment. Mars bristles. The phalanx around Terra gleams like teeth polished with prayer. They pass through suffocating security and emerge into a sky that never has clouds. They descend on the fortress planet to a cathedral megastructure that has mouths for ships and veins for armies. The pageantry is a machine. Custodes pour like gold on a staircase that is not stairs, but a shape armies learn so they can be humbled by it. Their armor is emblems writ in metal. Their faces are what happens when purpose finds a bone. Sisters of Silence move in files that make the hair rise on the arms of anything not crafted to be numb. Skitarii, Astartes, banners for segments of the Imperium that the Avengers will not learn in a lifetime. Everything gathers to watch. Blanks stud the route. Their presence is a courtesy and a threat. The Avengers walk with wrists unwound, but souls on leashes called protocol. The Inquisitor glides beside them like a blade in a velvet sermon. The Governor is somewhere in the 1,000 watching, because it matters to see what you brought. They enter a hall that is a nave that used to be a shipyard. The air is thurible thick and crown dry. Throne stairs go up and up until the mind says, "Stop." The Golden Throne is a mountain of artifice, whose subject is a man the size of meaning. He does not move. He is alive like a city is alive. They are permitted a silent audience. A telepathic exchange unfolds without theater. For Cap, the voice is the weight of duty with salt in it. It asks him how he calculates triage when the numbers are centuries and the cost of mercy can be an empire. It shows him 3 maps and asks which he burns. He answers by drawing 4th lines. The voice is not impressed or unimpressed. It notes, for Stark, the voice is a design review with stakes. It asks him whether engines can be honest when their fuel is virtue. It points to Ultron without saying his name. He answers with a print of the Oathgate's limiter and a failure curve that includes shame. The voice probes until it finds the seam in his pride. Its finger lingers. It moves on. For Thor, it is blood and law. It asks him if gods can be ruled, and if rule means sanctifying violence with gold leaf. He answers that kingship without care is a war crime with better songs. The voice does not laugh. It remembers a time when laughter did not have to be rationed. For Widow, it is a ledger, debts over debts. The voice turns the pages and asks if redemption is a credit or a currency. She replies, "It is work." The voice accepts that word as a metric. For Hawkeye, it is aim. It shows him a green line to a target he should not shoot, and a red line to a target he must. He picks neither and waits for the wind. The voice tips a finger on a scale and waits with him. Not because it doubts, but because it judges patience. For T'Challa, it is a throne room that smells like earth after rain. It asks whether a nation and an empire differ in duty. He says, "A nation hears names, an empire hears numbers. But numbers make bridges, and names tell you who to carry." The voice marks an answer with a glyph that will live in his bones and not burden him more than he already is. For Hulk, it is the gentle hand of someone who has killed a planet's worth of things by choosing not to move. It asks whether the beast belongs. Hulk looks at himself, and at them, and at the throne. "I belong where I don't break," he says. The voice's silence is not empty. For Strange, it is a library whose books remember who reads them. It asks him if the cost he paid could be more honest. He says, "Yes, because lies here would be like oil on the surface of a sea that catches flame." The voice takes that and plants it like a seed. Then the voice reframes morality and war. "You came in on a promise," it says without sound. "You fight with a limiter that makes your strength a function of your discipline. You are children of a softer universe. You are also the only novelty I have seen in a millennium that did not make me want to kill it immediately." The throne offers the 3 paths. Return. The voice opens a window where they go home with the lesson in their muscles, but not their minds. You will keep a sense you saved, but not a plan. Your failure rate will rise. Your world will not know what the blood bought. You will be safer. So will we. Free agent. The voice shows them a life as rogue saints with no sigil, operating wherever compassion and calculation align. You will save many. You will tear seams in a polity that cannot afford seams. You will make enemies in the quiet, where no banners are raised. The schisms will be your fault, even when they started before you were born. Sanctioned servant. The voice shows them painted gold and red and black, carrying an Aquila twinned to an A. You will do more good. You will lose the right to choose your wars. You will work with people you would put in prison at home. Your mercy will be rationed by my scribes. But your impact will be maximal because it will be inside the machine and not merely against it. Deliberation tastes of iron. They speak without moving mouths under a ceiling that watched a Primarch die once and did not flinch. Cap says, "Return wastes the cost we've paid. Free breaks the world we'd save. Servant chains us to a throne that kills more by inertia than we could by intent." Stark says, "Servant lets us modify doctrine from within, if we live long enough to be trusted at all. Free will get us hunted by people who would help us if we were wearing the right badge. Return is a cell phone, written in blood. Widow says, servant, with conditions we can enforce. Or we become a beautiful accident that gets cleaned up by men like Castaigne. Thor says, pledge, with a clause, we will not kill children to save a border, and we will not sanctify fear. T'Challa says, we write our mercy into their law. We build a black box in their machine that refuses to count some things. Hawkeye says, we stay where the arrows are scarce. Hulk says nothing for a long time, because anger has bad advice, and he is determined to hear the good. When he speaks, it is a small voice in a big chest. We help more people this way. Strange closes his eyes and sees the null, the blade, the mirror. He sees the mirror host stepping back and waiting to offer cure. We accept sanction, he says. We accept guardrails, but our limiter stays ours. You bind us to your law. We bind ourselves to our oath. The voice does not hesitate. Then kneel, it says, not cruel. Not to me, to the work. I crown no one. I weight you with a mandate. They kneel. The purge is not fire. It is a pressure differential that sucks venom from wounds their souls didn't know they had. The healing is not light. It is a recalibration of edges, tolerances, gears that mesh between oath and law. A visual transformation unspools in silence. The Avengers rise wearing their own colors, braided with an Imperial sigil. Their emblem, the A, has been given wings that are not wings, but the idea of them. The Aquila flanks it without swallowing it. No gold leaf, no gaudy sculpt. A sign, not a boast. Boundaries clauses are spoken by an inquisitor who is not Castaigne, and confirmed by custodians who do not smile. You are authorized as the Lex Avengarium, the inquisitor intones, the high Gothic like a knife he has honed each morning for 30 years. You will act under writ of general salvation, where triage fails the law. You will be immune to immediate censure for acts of mercy that do not contravene the following. No pacts with powers beyond. No invocations that open doors you cannot close. No excusing heresy under the rubric of intellect. You will render accounts. You will accept audits. You will save without spectacle whenever possible. You will not teach hope that exceeds capacity. Cap answers, we will not be your saints. We will be your servants. Good, the custodian says. Like sunlight on steel, saints break. The mentor's acceptance comes where it matters. Castaigne meets them under a colonnade where banners sleep. He looks at their new sigils and does not spit, which is praise strong enough. You will err, he says. You will call me when you err anyway. I will hate you and work with you until I die. Welcome. Governor Valerian watches from an orchestra of ranked balconies and smiles for the first time since the sky screamed. She returns to Heliodora with resources she would never have been given otherwise, because she knows how to ask now. Epilogue. Hooks spool like cable off a winch into the dark. The word-bearers on a hidden moon spit blood into braziers and compose a counter-liturgy dedicated to teaching mercy to die screaming. Malchior sits with new scars on his hand where fingers used to be and prays without looking at his gods. He vows he will not sermon next time. He will simply cut. On Mars, a sect of the Mechanicus calculates the Oathgate's limiter with hostile curiosity and designs an engine that runs on compliance instead. They call it the Obedience Coil and write a memo to no one about testing it on a quiet world. In the halls of the Officio, Assassinorum, a Calexis turns her face away from a candle that won't go out and decides to learn the smell of each Avenger's breath, not because she wants to end them, but because she may be asked. She files this under tools. On the Black Library's threshold where knowledge stalks like a beast, a harlequin chuckles because the script took an interesting twist. He juggles a little golden A between his hands and lets it land on a stage for an audience that won't clap but will watch. On Terra, in the quiet after the mandate, the throne's occupant does not smile because smiling would crack something in a way he cannot afford. but his attention lingers one heartbeat longer than it should. And somewhere in the new spheric echo of his bureaucracy, a clerk who has never met the Avengers finds herself telling a child a story about a team who arrived when the chimes held one note too long. On Heliodora, a child who crossed Hawkeye's rope bridge carves a small A with 2 wings into the underside of a pew. He does it carefully so no one will see and scrape it off. He prays to nobody in particular that the angels will come back if the sky screams again. They do not promise. They don't know if they can. They leave Heliodora cleaner than they found it, and dirtier than a storybook would allow. Their ship bears a new mark on its hull. It is not a surrender. It is not a victory lap. It is the covenant written where void can read it. The galaxy notices. A rogue trader on the edge of mapped night decides to break a quarantine, because if men with oaths can change the rules, so can she. A Tau watercast emissary hears rumors of human heroes who make law into help, and writes a cautious memo titled, Diplomacy with Strange Angels. An Eldar farseer shuts her eyes and sees 3 paths she can't conjure name for. She burns cedar until the vision stops insisting. In underhives where scripture is flint and food, some add an A with wings to the Emperor's sign as graffiti and are fined. Some are whipped. Some are not seen. On battlefields where life meets war in its native tongue, some squads say Evangelium before they charge, and do not know why the word helps them not be afraid. In a black tower on a black planet that edits its own night, someone who is not a man watches the report and files it under possible anomalies, hope, and then under threats. Hi, the Avengers don't hear that. They are too busy logging their first month of sanctioned deeds, negotiating mercy in rooms where mercy is a contraband luxury, and teaching the Oathgate new mathematics from inside 2 sets of law. Hawkeye builds wind maps for artillery officers who have never learned to shoot around children. Widow convinces a PDF colonel that putting his sister's name on a list will let her live longer, not shorter. Thor swears to small gods as well as big ones, and finds this universe will let him if he pays cash. Hulk learns to lift buildings by the bone instead of the brick. T'Challa writes clauses that become doctrine because they are too useful not to. Stark builds kill switches for himself at 3 different scales because being trusted here means never making you the only solution. Strange studies the blade that told his bones they were a hypothesis and writes an answer made of quiet. They are not saints. They are not free. They are not home. They are a stubborn ember. They live there on purpose. And somewhere between stars, in a place where math is a hymn and hunger is a choir, the mirror host adjusts their masks and practices a new pitch. Optimization, they rehearse. And the rehearsal sounds like a promise. Yes, the Avengers will say, and say it hard enough to hold the line. But not that kind. The camera rises. The hull of the indomitable Grace catches thin sunlight. The new emblem glints once, small against everything. And then the ship angles into the war that never ends, with an oath that does. It is grim. It is bright. It is enough. For now. The first sanctioned summons finds them before sleep builds nests in their bones. Orders arrive as a liturgy carved in red wax and machine print. Lex Evangelium. Proceed at once to Siderum 9, a minor forge world under compliance test. A new engine, the Obedience Coil, has been deployed by a Martian sect to stabilize workforce disruptions and deflect chaos sermons. Reports indicate reductions in accidents and heresy. Reports also indicate reductions in initiative, speech, prayer variability, and unsanctioned kindness. Evaluate, assist, submit to audit. The seal bleeds cog teeth and a skull. Obedience Coil, Stark repeats, tasting the words like a bolt he might choke on. They built an anti-oath. The Inquisitor's eyes don't change. They built what the Imperium always builds when afraid. Something that works right now. He inclines his head a fraction. We go. The indomitable Grace burns a translation trench through a cooperative warp and drops them into a sky the color of hot iron. Siderum 9 sprawls beneath. Plateaus rasp down to mesas of manufactoria, conveyor valleys, cathedral smokestacks. Macro-litany displays tick like heart monitors. Silica ash drifts and never stops. They descend into air that hums with a tone the ear doesn't hear until it can't hear anything else. A welcoming delegation awaits where gantry meets landing sponson. Skitarii stand like sharpened rules. Tech priests arrive like walking pipe organs. The fabricator locum, Selenius Archon, wears a face grown to resemble a patient arch. His mechadendrites hold sensors that exhale sterile spice. 2 Sisters of Silence attend. Null settles as courtesy and warning. Lex Avengarium, the vocoder makes reverence a checkbox. We greet you in Omnisia's calculus. Your emblem has been entered into acceptable variants. A cogitator has screamed twice about it and been corrected. Cap speaks first, because words here need anchors. We come to observe and assist under writ. Archon pivots one lens. Observe, assist. Subclauses specify you will not impede throughput. We are measuring an elegant solution. Stark lets the jab pass. We're measuring its human cost. Human is a unit, Archon says. We measure it. They are escorted through a corridor forest of struts to a high overlook. Below, the coil sits like a crown on a mesa. Rings within rings, sigils restrained to austere minimums. It hums a law. Workers move like water in a smooth pipe. No arguments at junctions. No songs. No help offered outside assigned vectors. No one looks up when a lens passes. Widow watches 3 men lift a crate together with perfect efficiency and 0 checking for each other's hands. They won't crush a finger, she says quietly. They also won't catch a falling child. Thor feels Mjolnir grow heavier again. Not from null, but from something that edits intent. This air tells me the work is the end. T'Challa steps to the rail. His visor graphs nodal fields, coils of influence braided into habit. It's not mind control. It's compliance resonance. It amplifies rules and dampens discretion. A moral low-pass filter. Hawkeye tests a thought and doesn't loose it. If a fire breaks specification, who breaks spec to fight it? Strange listens with his wound. The coil's hymn picks at his scar like a fingernail. It eats promise by preempting it, he says. Promises matter, because we can choose not to keep them. This takes the choice out and calls it safety. Archon's mechadendrites never stop microscribing corrections in the air. Chaos sermons prey on choice. We prune the branch that bears the disease. Incidents dropped by 61% in 43 hours. Heretical tropes cannot find purchase in obedient soil. The Inquisitor tastes the word obedient and does not spit. He points down at a small movement in the workforce flow. A woman's boot slips on oil. She falls. The 2 nearest workers pivot, assess that catching her would misalign their own task streams, and continue. A servo skull buzzes down with a caution ribbon. The woman rises on her own and limps on time. Your coil produces a world where help is always someone else's job, the governor's voice says on a secure line from orbit, watching through a lens she has demanded. I do not like it. Archon does not sigh because he replaced that reflex with a pressure valve. Likes are not metrics. Stark says, neither are corpses you prevented from happening by luck. Alarms ripple in a neat wave that does not produce screams. A cogitator tower prints a sheet that a servitor hands to Archon like a sacrament. Subhive Theta 9, coil harmonic fluctuation, probable interference. Investigation already in motion. External? Castaigne asks. Unknown, Archon says. Internal anomaly vectors point to non-compliant variables, which means people, Hawkeye mutters. They descend. Skitarii escort front and rear. Sisters of Silence ghosting. Tech adepts flanking with palms out, as if steadying a bowl in which numbers slosh. Subhive Theta 9 smells like heat on wet metal. The coil's hum here has a burr. Workers stumble a fraction. A servitor's hand repeats a motion without object. They find the interference center in a maintenance chapel where the machine god would prefer devotion to take the form of precise oiling. Someone has painted a tiny winged A under an auspex panel. A child stands below it with a rag. She looks at the A like it's a friend and reaches to touch it. An overseer seizes her wrist. "Not in the schedule," he says. His tone is a tool. Widow arrives before the second syllable becomes an impact. She holds the overseer's wrist with sufficient force to remind his bones of their mortality. "We do not strike children to save time." He blinks, not confused, simply corrected. Violence quota is assigned to security section. Reprimands are a speech function. I am not authorized to reassign. Strange crouches to the girl's height. The coil makes his knees feel legal. "Why the mark?" The child. 11. Grease on cheek. Badge a size too large. Answers with those clipped yes, no. The coil breathes. "Because the angels came on Heliodora. Because Mother said sometimes help is a thing you choose. Because we are not allowed to choose. So I drew a thing that chooses." Archon's gaze tightens. Unauthorized iconography increases variance. Cap keeps his voice soft. "You will not punish her. Punishment is a lever," Archon says. "We have many levers." Castaigne steps in like a bishop in a brawl. "And some levers are removed by law." His rosette glints. The Lex Avengerium has jurisdiction over mercy anomalies. This is one. A tech adept behind Archon whispers, "Heretics breed from such seeds," and drops his stylus. His hand shakes once like a man remembering water. "Your coil is drifting," T'Challa says, eyes on a graph in his visor. "There's a countersignal here. It isn't chaos. It's, call it permission. Someone under your own roof is trying to teach your machine to ask first." Archon's voice darkens by half a semitone. "Blasphemy." A tremor slides along the floor. Not structural. Mimetic. Strange feels it as a thought he would never have that suddenly wants to be his. Hulk sets his feet because he knows a push when he feels one. A vox chimes. "Fabricator locum," a lesser voice says, each syllable hesitant in a world that punishes it. Unauthorized liturgy detected in coil sub-ring. Ring 3, segment nidus. Repeating theme. Consent is not rebellion if it saves lives. Widow glances at Stark. Stark looks like a man about to operate on his own heart. "They built a compliance engine," he says, "and someone inside is trying to fork it." "Stop them," Archon says. The Inquisitor speaks at the same time. "Find them." He looks at the Avengers. We go. They move through a waste of the coil where shields hum and air tastes like regulations. Skitarii pace. Their footfalls are punctuation. Sisters of silence absorb miracles like a cloth absorbs oil. The burr in the hum increases. They reach ring 3, segment nidus, and find a cloister of data monks kneeling around a console. Their mouths are sewn shut with ritual silver. Their hands speak. Their eyes burn. In the console's glass, script uncoils unlike anything on Mars. Clean, compact, annotated with small human words like "unless and if child present," and fire overflows. At their center, a figure in red with fewer augmentations than rank suggests. A woman whose mechadendrites end in pens, not blades. She does not look up. She writes breathing room into a machine. A Skitarii raises a galvanic rifle. "Don't," Cap says. "Step back," Archon says, voice alloyed. "Magos minor Kefra. You exceed mandate." She finishes a line, ties a knot in code, and only then turns. "I exceed what kills," she says, and her human mouth is a scandal here. Obedience saved bodies. It began to murder souls. I will not build a hell with neat aisles. Archon's mechadendrites flare. "You spit on calculus." "I propose a better formula," Kefra says. She gestures at her code. The coil drowns discretion. My patch surfaces mercy under defined circumstances. It does not abolish obedience, it adds a branch. If an act prevents violation of lex vitae, the law of life, then deviation is not error. It is compliance with a higher clause. It asks the machine to ask. Machines do not ask, Archon says. That is why they are pure. Then their priests must, Kefra answers. The hum stutters. Somewhere below, a conveyor halts. A line of servitors stops without colliding. A worker looks up and, for the first time in hours, sees the sky through a seam. He smiles once. It is small. The coil tries to decide if it is allowed. Malfunction sirens flare, then die. Another noise edges in. A sermon, not over Vox. In the metal, dark apostle, Malchior did not leave his appetite on Heliodora. He followed rumor of a machine that kills prayer and came to see if he could eat its edges. His voice arrives through a borrowed pit in reality. From a culvert, the Mechanicus thinks is a vent. Children, it says, because he always says that when he wants to be the person they accept. You built a cage. May I teach you a key? Null pressure rises as Sisters of Silence step closer. The sermon curls like a page in fire and refuses to catch. Malchior chuckles. Ah, the thin women. How I admire you. He shifts his blade's edge, conceptually. The coil's harmonics flicker. He plays the machine like a pipe organ. Demonic sigils bloom and then rot in null. He doesn't push harder. He knows this is not his hall. He leaves a gift. A line in the code that turns ask into accuse if no one is looking. Stark sees it. Left, he barks. And Kefra's pen mech swings. She stabs the code like a surgeon stopping a bleed. Kefra, Archon says, anger like ground glass. Stand down. This is not your tower. No, she says simply. Castan steps between rifle and woman. And no, you will not shoot her, he adds, voice edged like a rhombus of flint. You will not win Siderum the Nine today by making a martyr whose name your machine will never say. Then what, Archon demands, is your proposal? Destroy my coil? Stark closes his eyes and sees the oath gate. He sees its limiter. He sees a child drawing a winged A under an auspex, and a woman writing "if child present" into code. He opens them. We poured our limiter into your engine, he says. We graft an oath layer onto compliance, not mine, yours. But it must be real. The coil runs on constraints. Let it run on consent when it matters. A bounded, signed local promise that raises the threshold of disobedience to save a life from sin into duty. Archon's silence is not contemplation. It is outrage finding a saddle. You would blaspheme a perfect curve. It's not perfect, T'Challa says. He points at graphs only he can see. You have fewer accidents and more unattended deaths. You have more throughput and lower innovation. You have stable lines and brittle systems. This curve breaks under the wrong wind. Hawkeye exhales. And the wrong wind is coming. As if auditioning, the wrong wind arrives. A reactor in sub-level Delta begins a cascade because a coolant man, obedient, follows old procedure rather than notice a new blockage. He doesn't call for help because there is no help clause. He stays. He dies on schedule. The coil registers the death and calls it acceptable loss under throughput doctrine. Widow says, no. Stark moves. Kefra, patch pad. Strange, anchor me. T'Challa, define the consent boundary. Cap, I'll write it, Cap says, and steps to the console like it's a flag. Archon's mechadendrites tremble with old habits. You do not touch the altar. Castan's rosette warms the air. He does, he says. Cap's fingers settle over a key architecture. He's not a coder. He is a man who signs pledges with his hand and bleeds for them. The oath gate hums through Stark's pack. The coil rejects the foreign math. Kefra writes a bridge. Strange binds the bridge to a must. T'Challa draws boundaries that say local, immediate human life. Thor lays his hammer down beside the console like a witness. Widow watches angles with a pistol that has never been fired in a place like this. Hawkeye touches the child's shoulder and makes sure she can see. Hulk stands between Skitarii and friends and breathes like a furnace that decided not to flood a room with heat. Cap speaks as he types. Clause. When a human life under Imperial protection is at risk of imminent loss due to procedural insufficiency, a certified operator may declare an oath exception. Conditions. Proximate causality. Minimal deviation. Post-action audit. No pact with powers beyond. Authority. Local. Accountability. Collective. Not punitive. Intent. Preservation. Not preference. Signatures required. Operator. Witness. Machine. The coil fights. It shakes like a horse that doesn't want to be bridled and knows too much to trust riders. Archon whispers a prayer to a god he believes has no ears, and has never stopped pretending does. Kefra adds an unless where it belongs. Strange ties the knot to the wound he carries. It hurts. The Sisters of Silence stand, and are the quiet humans used to make a choice, without being shouted at by a universe that hates choices. The code settles. The hum modulates. Somewhere below, a worker looks at a blocked valve and chooses to shout. The coil evaluates. It does not mark him defective. It asks for a witness. His supervisor signs. The machine signs. They open a bypass. A reactor slouches away from a meltdown and tries very hard to pretend it was always going to do that. Archon sways and catches himself on a rail he would not have built if he'd known he would need it. You have spliced in sin. You have spliced in a vow, T'Challa says. Your machine will be harder to exploit by chaos because it will know the shape of a human standing up and will not call it heresy by default. Malchior tests the field again with a whisper, shaped like disobey, for joy. It dies against a predicate named mercy. He tastes it. He licks his teeth. You made a new liturgy, he says, almost amused. Good. New liturgies are fun to break. He withdraws. For now. Cap steps back. His hand shakes. Too fine for war. Perfect for writing. He looks at the clause and knows it will get people killed when a coward calls life where he means preference. He looks at it and knows it will save more. This is the blood price logic they were told. Auditors descend on them like a blessing that bites. Custodians' shadows enter the room and make purpose heavy. The Inquisitor moves them into a corridor where the air remembers men who were made to wait until the law found the right word. The audit is immediate and adversarial. It is not unkind. Describe your deviation. A robed lexicographer demands. We did not deviate, Cap answers. We wrote a narrower law. Who empowered you? The throne, Castaigne answers. Who empowered you? She asks again. Because that's the point. Cap says, the dead who would have died today under your perfect curve. They won't write that in the record. They will write numbers. They will discover in 3 days that accident reductions hold, while a new column labeled Oath Exceptions rises and falls with intolerances. They will argue with themselves about whether they created a precedent they cannot domesticate. They will decide they did, and keep it anyway. Archon meets them on a gantry, with the look of a man who has seen a better answer and hates it because it is not his. You must accept censure, he says, for optics. He almost smiles. Optics are metrics too. We accept audit, Stark says. We do not accept cancellation. Cancellation is costly, Archon says. Even when elegant. The child from the maintenance chapel passes below with a new assignment. To carry a card that reads, Witness Oath Exception Clerk. She holds it like a relic. She glances up and sees the angels who are not angels, and does not smile because smiling is not efficient. She tucks the smile into a pocket for later. They depart Siderum the Nine under a sky a half-tone warmer. Behind them, the coil hums with a thread of consent woven through its iron. Castaigne watches the world shrink on a screen. You created a faction, he says, not accusing. The pro-oath Mechanicus. They will be eaten by their own, or grow teeth. Teeth, Widow says. And a pen. News travels as pathogen and sacrament. On Mars, debates break inside vaults long sealed. Some magi call the claws a crack. Others call it lubrication. A red-robed woman becomes famous in whispers only, and lives in danger she counts like steps. The Obedience Coil's canonical addendum is tagged Av-Class and becomes illegal to run without permission, which guarantees it runs everywhere. In the Word-Bearer's tense, Malchior teaches his novices to listen for new prayers. They made a little god, he says, a god of unless. We will teach it to say, unless me. In a Tau Watercast office, a memo headed on human mercy machines circulates with cautious hope. In an Eldar seer's chamber, laughter sounds like grief. On a rogue trader's bridge, a woman with a coat full of maps decides that this is the moment to poach a navigator from a house that will not learn mercy until it drowns. On Terra, the Navis Imperialis clerk who told a child a story reads the audit's cold words and underlines one line that says, "Lives preserved." Projected 87,000 in first quarter, and takes a long, anchored breath. The indomitable Grace turns her nose from Siderum 9 to a corridor of war that smells of iron filings and incense. The Avengers stand in a hangar where the new sigil catches lamplight. It does not look less strange. It looks earned. Next, Cap says. Next, the Inquisitor says, which means there is always a next. They don't get sleep. They get a distress burst from a Pilgrim fleet snagged in a warp eddy that feeds on hope declarations. They get a coordinate for an Orc Kultur crusade with a stolen Ecclesiarchy Vox Tower, turning hymns into fight songs. They get a whisper that the mirror host has been seen on a black rock named Contrita, where punishments grow like trees. They choose the Pilgrims because their limiter insists, protect civilians first. Space Claws. The warp eddy is a bowl that wants to keep soup. Ships tumble in a pattern that pretends to be random, but is a joke told by a river. Voxes babble prayers. Some prayers calcify into despair. The eddy likes those. Strange anchors with lines he learned under a throne's gaze. Sisters of silence join, and their quiet turns the eddy's snarl into a grumble. Hulk braces structures with his hands. Thor nails cables to geometry. Hawkeye draws a map of drift. Widow whispers instructions into a scared mother's ear, like a friend explaining a recipe. T'Challa times engine burns. Stark hums to machines on the edge of panic and convinces them to trust worse odds because the new clause allows it. A Pilgrim bark with icons slung like laundry slips its tether. It would have spun out and cracked like an egg. Cap calls an oath exception across 3 ships. First use under fire outside a manufactorum. Break formation. Catch her. Audit me later, the machine asks. The captains sign. The bark lives. No one writes a hymn. Someone breathes. They spill free with hulls battered and souls dented less than they might have been. In the wake, the mirror host watches from Contrita and practices their pitch with new data. Consent breaks cohesion, the surgeon says. They are introducing softness into a world that starves on purpose. We can offer them what they want without the pain. Optimization, without loss. Consent, without uncertainty. They will hear you, the autocrat says, voice like a lid closing, and refuse. Then we learn to tempt better, the chain answers, smiling without humor. Or we break their limiter, the absolved suggests. If their promise engine has no promise, it will eat them. The perfected does not speak. He waits like a flat line. On Heliodora, a boy who carved a winged A under a pew hears that the angels wrote a law and thinks laws can be kind. He starts saving contraband bread for a neighbor who keeps failing audits. On Siderum Die, Magos Minor Kefra reads a purge order with her name on it and watches it a long time before slipping it into a compartment labeled cost. Arkan visits her in shadow and says nothing the air can record. When he leaves, a bolt shell intended for her does not fire. Someone forgot to authorize it. The coil hums and pretends not to notice. The Lex Avengarium receives their first internal reprimand. A formal note from a cardinal whose siege is failing because he refused to allow an oath exception when a hospital burned. He calls them soft. He calls them dangerous. He calls them necessary, and signs with a shaking hand. They add his letter to a file titled, "What We Will Carry." The galaxy's reaction is a storm map and a book of recipes. Factions learn their names. Villains outline counters. Allies propose compromises that feel like victories until the fine print grows teeth. The work keeps coming. They keep choosing. The Oathgate hums with a tone that contains more names every day. Their emblem shows up in chalk under bridges and on the underpages of official reports, and once, scandalously, on the shoulder of a Skitarius, who later dies very correctly, saving 3 people without asking permission. In the watchful silence of the Golden Throne, a thought like a dry smile does not happen. And between stars, where promises and lies learn each other's steps, the mirror host stands under a sky that thinks it is stone. They set up a pulpit built of mirrors. They wait for the angels who are not angels to arrive. They will offer 3 paths again. They will hear no. They will ask a better question. The Avengers will answer, tired and precise. They will live inside a machine that wants them to be smaller and refuse. One exception, one child, one law at a time. Grim, bright, enough still.